technically 5 if you count like the balsamic mushrooms and onions that we're making to go on top of our burgers. But the point is, we're going to take out of this whatever you want to do. If it's not something that you're going to eat all of it, maybe a couple pieces will work. And my goal always is to introduce you guys to interesting flavors and ingredients and maybe find a different way that you can approach doing something like a barbecue for yourself or with your family. So let me do a quick head count with Sam. Sam, do we seem to have most of our people at this point?
Let's see, we're missing quite a few people.
Missing quite a few? I
Yeah.
think it's only 5:03, so I can wait a couple more minutes as we're getting things ready, and I'll shift my first ingredients over. I'm going to do my best not to turn my backs on everyone and not to talk when I'm not facing our wonderful microphone that's here on my laptop. So we'll make do. Sam's really good at kind of working this together so that we can see side by side of me trying to talk to you and also try to cook. So you got a better appreciation if you ever watch Food Network and really having to pay attention to like making eye contact and looking up versus just looking at your food. So it's been a big learning experience for me, who tends to be an internal processor and talk to myself as I cook. Now I have to externally process and say it in a way that makes sense. So I will do my best. If I at any time I'm talking, you guys can't hear me, please just speak up. Let us know so that it's not, so we don't go on and like miss out, because if you can't hear something, someone else can't hear something. So tonight, if you're going to be using, just for a little rundown, now I don't expect anyone to be cooking along with me. I know I really work ahead to try to have most of my ingredients cut and prepped, so it's not you watching me cut onions, which is not a super stimulating class. So I want to streamline it. There's a couple of things I have prepped ahead so that we can just kind of put it together and talk about it versus all the nitty gritty. It always going to take a little bit longer than what it looks like here. But for the most part, when I was picking recipes, I'm trying to find things that taste good, that also use healthy food. My big thing is always pushing more plant-based foods and doing it in a way that's user-friendly. Because if it's too complicated and you've never done it before, most likely you'll walk away and say, that was interesting, but I don't really have the time or the energy or want to put the effort into it. So, with the recipes I sent you, I'm always researching and going online and trying to find different things that look good to me. I always will cook things ahead and make little changes based on what I thought worked. And I also rely heavily on my husband and my son, who are pretty critical and honest with what they think, so that I can get their input and figure that, they're not vegetarians, but if I can get them to eat some vegetarian foods and some healthy foods and they like it, then I know that it's something that's definitely worth demonstrating here and hoping that you guys will possibly use these recipes later. The reason with this, thinking about barbecues, we always think about, something we can throw on a grill. Well, I'm inside the Cancer Survivorship Center, so we're not actually going to have a grill inside of here, but I am going to have a big skillet that I'm working with certain foods, especially when we're looking at, more plant-based or vegetarian burgers. Sometimes they are more likely to fall apart, so they're a little bit more delicate if you're throwing it on a grill. In those cases, I'll give you some tips of how to make it work, but it works just as well being able to do it right here on top of a stove, use electronic skillet, whatever you have. You are able to do all these recipes and make sure that they work and that it's going to taste good. So hope that, we got still half of our summer left, depending on who you talk to. So I hope you can use some of these recipes or all of them the next time you're getting together. Most of them can be made ahead and they're really easy to reheat. I'd say there's not one thing I'm making here today that would not work, as a prep it and then have it ready to throw on the grill so that you're not stuck in the kitchen chopping all day. I know if I'm hosting people, I really don't like to be stuck over the stove. I want to be able to talk, interact, kind of pull things out, have them pretty much ready to go so that I'm not sitting worrying about a recipe. So I'm going to get started because now we're about 5:07. So the first thing, our 4 recipes tonight. We had we have a 3-bean salad. We're making black bean burgers. And it's an option I brought in because I wanted for people who are interested in vegetarian foods, people who are vegetarian or vegan and want to have a choice other than just eating the salad. So it's something that I wanted to introduce and make it really easy for all of you to try so that you would be able to use this at home and see if, hey, maybe it's another option. Plus, Plus, it's a good way to be able to just have some more healthy, high fiber foods that are high in antioxidants, that are, low in fat, and the fats they offer are actually good, healthy omega-3 fats. We're also going to be doing a chicken burger, which gives you an alternative that's lighter than doing your, the usual beef burger. It cuts down a lot on the saturated fats, and it adds great flavor, and it's super, super, super easy. And then the final thing we're doing is a mixed berry cobbler. It's something I've done for years. I actually pulled out the recipe because I used to do it all the time. And I did a couple little tweaks on it to make it a little bit lighter. I also cut out, there's no flour in it. So if anyone has gluten allergies, they could have this. You don't have to worry about any sensitivities with it. And it's easy. You can make it head, you can heat it up. It doesn't take very long. If I were doing it in live time, I would make sure that I started with the warm berry cobbler so that I could get it in the oven. I want to get it to some of the other tasky things first. We're doing a little TV magic here and have like all the prep of the warm berry cobbler and then be able to show you the finished product when we're done with it. So if you're looking over at our food demo screen, the first thing we're going to start with is our ridiculously easy 3-bean salad. Easiest way to do this, on the recipe I sent, you can use either a food processor, which I do feel like is the best option because it's going to get things mixed up really, really well. You can do it by hand, and there was also that in the recipe. You just have to work a little harder because you're breaking up those beans and like the little outside skins that are on there. So sometimes it may not be quite as smooth as if you use the food processor or even an immersion blender. If you have an immersion blender at home, you would rather use that. Both will work. It doesn't, once you're outside of this, you can use a big one or small one. This is not a really big recipe, but we're starting with this. So in here, I threw it in ahead of time so that we're not spending too much time watching me again, chop and measure. We have our 2 scallions, which I cut up, and then the equivalent of about 2 heads of garlic that I threw in. You could always do a little more, a little less. The great thing with cooking is you can adjust the ingredients for your flavor and not worry that it's not going to taste good or it's not going to work. It will work. It'll be fine. So we're just going to blend this up a little bit so it's chopped up. So I'm going to stop talking as I do it. We'll see. Now I had my garlic minced up already, so it did make it a bit easier because it didn't have to chop down the whole head. But if you have a whole head of garlic, you just want to make sure it's getting chopped up and kind of fine, as you see in here. Let's see in my camera. You don't want big clumps of garlic getting into your mouth as you're trying to eat this. Now, this is the part of the recipe that probably is going to sound the strangest to you, because when we are talking about a bean burger or even a vegetable burger, the big thing that you need are binders, because with chicken or pork or beef, it's sticky, it will stay together. I could add some herbs, some spices, put it into a patty, it will be fine. But when we're talking about things like beans, they're going to fall apart if we're just mixing along with other vegetables. So you need to find binders. So probably the strangest ingredient in here is oatmeal. So I have a little blended cup here. I'm going to toss it in. It has a 1/4 cup of walnuts, some cayenne pepper, which you can omit if you don't really like anything spicy. By all means, leave it out. It won't make the burger taste badly. I use smoked paprika because it does have kind of that nice flavor that you'd expect to be getting from a grill. And you can use regular paprika too, get those flavors in there. Little salt, pepper, whatever is going to make it taste good. But we put oatmeal in here because it's going to help absorb some of the fluids that are going to come out of the vegetables and especially the beans and help hold it together with a nice consistency. It is not going to taste like your breakfast cereal, I promise you. So give me a second, I blend this up. You see it kind of gets a little ground up, kind of like breadcrumbs in here. You can see the texture. You know, we have a little bit of our oats. We have, you know, a little bit of moisture coming out from the walnuts. And I did a test run because when I, you know, was playing with this first bean burger that I have made, I was like, I don't know about the oats. That might be a little strange. So I actually did this at home and did it both with oatmeal and I did it with panko breadcrumbs, just kind of like a nice crisper breadcrumb to see if one of them would work better than the other. And, you know, I had, again, the blind taste test between my husband, who's an avid meat lover, and my son, who's getting used to beans, but not his favorite thing. And the winning combination really was the oatmeal. And part of that is because you had a nice texture. When you bite into a burger, it's not really soft, smooth, and, you know, like peanut butter. It really has a little bit more of a texture because you have, you know, the muscle that's in there. There's usually a little bit of fat. So when you're thinking about eating a burger, we're really thinking about those textures. And when you're trying to introduce this as something new for other people, you want to play along and sort of get those nice textures and flavors. Texture is a big selling point with most foods. So I also right here added a little bit of tamari soy sauce. Tamari basically means soy sauce that doesn't have any gluten in it. So I used a gluten-free soy sauce and then some red wine vinegar, and just a little bit of balsamic vinegar, a teaspoon of balsamic vinegar. The reason being that little bit of sweetness in there kind of balances out the bean flavor and is really nice. A lot of the recipes you'll find online when you're looking at bean burgers uses maple syrup. And I thought that might push it over a little bit over the edge for, you know, my taste. I like things a little bit more savory than sweet, but it did have a very nice flavor. So the final thing is we have our black beans, which I've rinsed, you know, put them through a colander. I just use canned black beans. If you want to rehydrate your own beans from scratch, that's fine. But a whole can of black beans usually gives you about 3.5 cups, technically. So right around there, or sorry, a cup and a half. I'm thinking of my whole thing. So a cup and a half of beans are in here. Now I reserved some of the beans because when I did, you know, about a half cup's worth, we're going to mix that in by hand because when we did the taste test at home, we really found that not having any extra bean, all of it being blended up and smooth, especially when we use the panko breadcrumbs versus the oatmeal, the overall texture just needed a little bit of a tweak to make it taste better. So decided that trying to hide it and completely blend in the beans and make it look like it wasn't what it was didn't work as well. So we'll blend these in. So you'll blend it. There's still little bits of beans. You can make it a little smoother if you want, but having some texture in here actually helps to hold the burger together. So you don't have to sit and worry if it's not perfectly processed down because you're going to get a better product. So what we want to do is we're going to take it out of our food processor and we're going to scrape it into a bowl so that we can do our final mixing of the rest of our product and then form our patties. We'll see. In here, it has a nice scent to it because you have that saltiness that comes with soy sauce. You can smell the garlic. You have the scallions, which just give you a nice, light, balanced onion flavor versus doing raw onions. Since we are doing garlic and raw onions in the burger might be a little bit more overwhelming. So once you have, you know, your beans in here, you'll see that you can see some of the oats, you can see some of the ingredients. We're going to mix in the rest of our reserve beans. Should you make this at home, you can always decide exactly how much. Now the recipe says reserve half a cup. If you're like, you know, I only want to just get a couple tastes of it, I don't need that much like bean in my burger, that's fine. You make it to your own taste. Like I said, the beauty of cooking and why I prefer cooking to baking is you can break the rules a lot more without being like a chemist and knowing exactly every proportion. Now you'll see in here, you're getting kind of, you can either take this mixture and make like 4 patties that are a little bit smaller, Or what I think, because I did that when I did my test at home, being too thin with a burger like this, you'll see when we put a patty together, it has that color similar to having like a regular beef burger. If it's too thin, it kind of falls apart. You need a little bit more thickness. So in here, doing a thicker burger works better. You could also just turn it into, maybe 3 patties instead of 4, experiment with it. But I did find that 2 smaller patties just didn't hold up quite as well as if I'm trying to make a slider with regular ground chicken or ground beef. So because we have the oatmeal in here, and the reason we started with this is it needs a little time, like 5 minutes. You don't need a huge amount of time. It's not like you need a big leadway before you get into making this, but you want to allow, set your burgers aside. They are not meat, so you don't have to worry about putting them in the refrigerator. You're just going to let them sit, and it gives time for the oatmeal to start absorbing a little bit of that liquid and working as a better binder. So let me move a couple things out of the way so that we can move on to our next step. So now that we have our burgers done, we're going to look at getting our chicken burgers. This might be a little less daunting for a lot of you if you haven't been using any sort of vegetarian homemade burger before. I think the chicken's kind of the nice baby step, especially for family members. So what I bought, most time with chicken, you're getting, your chicken, if you use ground chicken, is really very pale. And this is mostly ground chicken breast. So it's a lot lighter than if I'm working with ground turkey. So good benefit there. When we're using white meat, we're cutting down on a lot of the fat, which is the point. If I'm not eating a beef burger, I don't want to be using equivalent thing that's just as fatty and not as healthy. I want to try to revamp it, play with flavor, and turn it into something that tastes really good, but that's also good for me. So in our chicken burger, we have a bunch of herbs. Pull this over, got my little list so I don't set you wrong. Now, like I said, I always try to measure everything ahead of time so that we're not sitting and measuring all of this in front of you. So we have a little bit of my minced garlic here. I added, instead of doing fresh oregano, I did some dry oregano and then threw in some fresh parsley. Partly because I'm using parsley somewhere else in my recipe, so why not utilize it in one spot? If you want to use fresh oregano or fresh chives, great. But if you go in your cabinet, you're like, I don't have the fresh stuff, but I have some dried chives and some dried oregano, just as good. You're just going to cut it down. If it's a tablespoon of fresh, you can get away with about a teaspoon of dried, but add as much as you like. And then we have our panko breadcrumbs. Panko I like better when we're doing some of these recipes because they're a little lighter, crisper, a little bigger pieces versus having a fine, classic breadcrumb. So you're going to put that all into your bowl, scrape it all in. And then we're going to add in, we want to mix it up a little bit. You're also going to have to add a little bit of liquid, a little bit of fat in here because we are not doing a regular burger. Regular burger, you can really just season it, but it has enough fat in it to give flavor and to really help it hold together when you're cooking it. So what I'm going to do is add just a couple tablespoons of mayonnaise. I know dietitians do use mayonnaise sometimes. You could switch it. If you don't use mayonnaise, you'd rather use Greek yogurt, you want to use a little sour cream, that's fine. Just don't use fat-free. Have a little fat in it because you need it to give moisture. We're already using ground chicken breast, and if you don't add a little bit of good fats to it, it's going to be hard to get a nice flavor, and you're going to have a dried out burger that probably won't be as tempting to your guests there at your house. Now, I mixed all the other ingredients ahead of time because one of the things that'll happen if you over mix, you got the meat in there from the beginning, you're trying to get the ingredients equally distributed, is you end up getting a tougher burger. You don't like overworking meat because it will be kind of chewy. It's not going to be a nice texture. So mixing things ahead and then adding in the burger at the very end, or I should say the ground meat at the end, is going to be better because you can get, a little bit less mixing. Now I'm just going to make life easier for myself right now. I'm wearing gloves. I'm just going to mix it just like you would a regular burger. You want to work it through so you can get your breadcrumbs evenly throughout, so you can get a little of that texture that's going to give it a nicer mouthfeel and a little bit hold in the moisture better. It's part of the reason we're using it, holds in moisture. I almost forgot. You also just add a little tang. We're using the juice from half of a lemon. So I squeezed a lemon earlier. It adds nice flavor. Because chicken is so light in flavor and texture, you can play, a lot of times you can go with more Greek flavors. If you're doing some, more garlic, if you're using a little more herbs and spices versus just doing salt and pepper like you would with a burger, like a beef burger. The green, I really like using the parsley because now we have some nice, color and texture in here, and we'll be able to make it in our burger. This recipe, it's a little bit bigger than the amount that we had from our beans. So we're going to turn it into about 3 or 4 burgers. You just put it into about the size that looks pleasing to you. Now, if you have made homemade burgers at home, the one trick they usually tell you, it's like, make sure you kind of do a little dimple with your finger in the center of the meat. It helps flatten it out so you don't have a really thick piece of meat in the center that doesn't cook. The little, if it's flattened out a little bit more evenly distributed, it's going to cook more evenly. And when we're working with chicken, for sure, we don't want to undercook it. You want to make sure that you're getting to that internal temperature of 165 degrees so that it is safe to eat. So I'm making 3 bigger burgers here. You could do it. You could do mini sliders. These ones are more forgiving than the bean burgers. It is chicken, so it's not like it has to be, it's going to not completely dry out. It has the breadcrumbs in here. It has some of the lemon juice, so it's going to work well. You can see the nice big patty. We'll get that cooking in a second. So now we have all of our burgers set aside, ready to go so that we can get on to the rest of our cooking. So let me move some of my notes. So we have our burgers ready. We're going to be moving them onto the grill in a couple minutes. Now, what I had said is you really had 5 recipes here because you have the burgers, you have the bean salad, we have the dessert, but we also have the onions. So for the mushrooms and onions, because it's not very interesting to watch someone cook mushrooms and onions, I did prep them ahead. And they're ready to go on the stove. All right, so with our mushrooms and onions, basically just cut up half of a medium onion. I had probably about 8 mushrooms, however many you like. I just put some olive oil in here. I allowed them to cook. Once they're warmed up and coated, throw on salt and cover it. Because when you cover it and it has salt on it, you cook it for about 5 to 7 minutes covered, all the liquid is going to come out of your mushrooms and onions. And that's what we want, because when we throw it onto our burgers, we're actually going to make a balsamic reduction with it. So we don't want everything to be really, really wet. We would like it to be a little bit drier so that we can get a nice flavor into it. So I'm going to get our grill turned on so it's going to be warmed up and ready to use in a couple minutes when we are ready to use it. If you're doing it outside, I said I'd give you some tricks. When you're cooking outside and you're going to make your bean burger, you're probably better off throwing like some tin foil or having like a little, cast iron baking sheet on top of your grill so that it's able to stay together and it's not going to crumble. Sometimes as you're turning a bean burger, a little piece might come off and you don't want it to all be falling down into the grill. So at the very least, put some aluminum foil down so that it's going to stay together and actually work really well. So while we're waiting for this to heat up, let's do our bean salad. Now with our incredibly easy 3-bean salad, we need to mix up and get our oil and vinegar, which we have in our bowl here. We're gonna mix it together along with a little bit of mustard and some honey. So I'm using Dijon mustard. You do about a teaspoon of it. You could do a little more, a little less, whatever you like. And then we want to add a little honey because it helps take out, making it too bitter. Now, it depends on your flavor palette. If you don't really like any sweet to it, don't add it, but just a little bit is a nice way of making sure that it tastes nice. You're not getting too much of that acidic flavor that you can get when you're using any sort of vinegar, especially using like, a red wine vinegar. So we're just going to get it mixed up. Then we can add our other ingredients. So with this, we have a ton of great vegetables. I always like having some really good vegetables. So we have our minced up onions. You want to get them fairly small because you don't want big chunks getting into your mouth when you're going to be eating it. Now, because onions just thrown into a salad and eating it raw, if anyone ever gets heartburn, that can be one of those terrible things. So to take out some of that bite and some of that raw flavor, I took these and soaked it in cool water for about 5-10 minutes and then drained it. And that takes out a little bit of that raw edge and it makes it more mellow. That's still too much for you, then I would recommend get some scallions or green onions, chop it up. It's going to add great flavor. It's also going to have nice color, but it's going to be a little bit more tame. Stay more with the green ends versus the white ends, and it's going to be a lot lighter. I'm gonna grab, sorry, I realized I didn't grab a spatula. So give me 2 seconds to step behind me because I'm gonna throw our burgers on. All right. So we have a make it work moment because you know what? We don't have spatulas here. So I'm gonna move this over so that you guys can see our grill pan here. I just have this set about medium high. I don't need it to be super, super hot. I'm going to throw a little olive oil on here so that the food doesn't stick to it. And we only need about 5, I'd say 5 minutes per side. Because I made this a little bit thicker, I want to make sure that everything is going to cook through really well. So I'd rather err on cooking it a little bit longer than undercooking it, especially when it comes to the chicken. So get my gloves on. Use a little bit of a paper towel to kind of spread it around so we get a nice even coat. And then we will put our burgers on here. So I'm going to flatten my chicken burgers just a little more because I do want to make sure that they get cooked through. And get the nice sizzle. Our bean burgers have had plenty of time to sit now. They've had at least 10 minutes. So they are able to go on here. It'll help them hold together. Now, anytime you're cooking bean burgers, you are going to get a little bit more like sediment around it, a little bit more, brown because you have like oats and beans. That's normal. It's fine. Our goal is to get this nice and browned up and we'll flip it. So I'm checking my watch for about 5:32. So we will flip this in about 5 minutes. While that's cooking, let's turn back this way a little bit. We are going to mix up the bean salad. So we're going to get 3 kinds of beans. Now the beans, I wrote on the recipes for you. Pick the beans that you like. but it's nice to have a little variety of color. So my favorite, I mean, I love chickpeas. So chickpeas, great, garbanzo beans, whatever you want to call them. They have a nice texture. They're a little bit more firm, which makes great for a salad because they're going to hold up. Even if I prepare this ahead of time, it's going to still have a nice flavor and texture. Kidney beans are great. They have, again, another nice firmness to them, so they're not going to get too mushy. You could use dark or light, whatever you prefer. I think the dark color, because we're using garbanzo beans and they are light, it's nice to have that color because we eat with our eyes. So we want to make sure that we're making this look appetizing. And then cannellini beans, they're nice. They're a little bit whiter, a little bit smaller than the kidney beans, but essentially they're a white kidney bean. They have a very mild flavor and work well in any type of salad. So once you have your beans in here, you're going to mix in your herbs and your spices. So we already talked about our onions that we'd soaked in water so that it wouldn't be too tart. Our capers, 3 tablespoons of capers. Capers are like sort of this little hero of the cooking world because they have a great peppery flavor without being overwhelming and really burning your mouth like sometimes cracked pepper will do. We have our chopped parsley and then some dried oregano. So easy. We're going to spread it on here. Throw all of that in, and then we also chopped up a cucumber. So medium-sized cucumber, chop it. I usually try to dice it pretty small, just so you have a nicer fork feel. It's not too much for like one bite. And I kept the peel on because I like the color, having a little bit more of the dark and the light. But if you would prefer just to peel the whole thing and cut it up, that's fine. You're still going to get excellent flavor. So you're going to mix your ingredients together. We're going to take our oil, vinegar, Dijon mustard, and the honey and mix it up, pour it over the top. And then all you need to do is mix it. And it can sit, it's great. It can stay in your fridge. Usually because we have the cucumbers in it, it's not going to last quite as long. When you go and buy like a bean salad, the jarred bean salads are at the deli counter. Generally, they'll use like maybe if there's a bean other than, legumes, they might put a green bean in it, like a canned green bean. The cucumber will get a little softer if you keep it too long. So I'd say, my rule for most foods I make is doing about 3 days. By 3 days, I'm ready to move on. You can see we have a nice like colors, textures. It looks good, smells really good. If you want to, you could also throw a little bit of salt and pepper on it, whatever works well. But I say if you keep it simple, even throw a little bit of lemon juice, you can add some tang to it. With the vinegar that's in it, it should be tangy enough. But you always want to suit it to your needs, to what you like, and to what your family likes, so that they're going to enjoy it. So we're at about the 4-minute mark. You see that our bean burgers, I'm going to loosen them up like a little, just to make sure. Yep, they're holding together, which is always a good sign. And our chicken burger. So we're going to take it, we're going to flip our chicken burger. Yeah, nice color on the other side. It looks good. Sorry, I'm not even really, can't see it. So you can see we got a nice like brown going on. And then very delicately, I'm going to use, since I touched the chicken after I touched the beans, I'm just using a different spoon. Look at that. If you are looking at this at a distance, and you are, because I'm the close one here, I mean, from a distance from the camera to here, you can see the bean burger even has a look more like a beef burger, which is kind of cool. So not that I advocate tricking anyone into eating healthy stuff, but it might be a little less off-putting than when sometimes people are looking at food and going, what is that? It looks so foreign. My original plan had been to do a
vegetable burgers, so using a lot of veggies, grinding it up. The only issue with a veggie burger is vegetables have a lot of water in them. So you would have to puree it, spread it, bake it, bring it out. But it was a lot of steps. And I decided for making it homemade, it's probably more work than most people want to do on their own. So this was far easier to work with the beans. So our last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take these onions. Now our onions we already had warmed up. We're just adding some balsamic vinegar. Balsamic vinegar has like a really nice sort of creamy, sweet flavor to it. You can mix this together. If I were at home, I would just throw this on the stove. But since we already have like a hot spot over here, we're gonna grill up our onions right on our grill surface. You'll see what's wrong. So while this is cooking, we have a couple more minutes. I'm gonna show you how to do a very easy mixed berry dessert. So let me bring my items over. Now, what makes this very easy, we'll come back this way, is that you can either use fresh fruit if you want, or what I do a lot, especially if it's winter, is I will get like a mixed berry blend that's frozen. It works just as good. It's ready to go, and it's super, super easy. So no matter what time of year you plan on making this dessert, it is going to, work out, not be super expensive, and you can get what you want. So this one has not blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, and some strawberries. Whatever you like. You can get a mix. Some people don't like blackberries because they are a little more tart. And I will tell you with this recipe, having more of that tart flavor to it, we want to make sure that we are balancing that out. So in the original recipe I would do years ago, it would be, like a quarter cup of flour in here, along with some cinnamon, nutmeg, a little bit of cinnamon and some sugar. And now we're adding honey. So in my little container here, I have some cornstarch and I have a little bit of cinnamon. What this will do is when I add this in, the cornstarch is going to help give that nice thickness that we want so that you get a gel. And that's what makes a lot of the warm berry desserts so delicious, is you get nice, warm, delicious gel sort of texture that's nice and creamy. So that's part of the reason I make a lot in the winter, because a nice, warm dessert in the winter time is great. But because it's berries, you have a lot of flexibility to be able to have also these summery flavors. Now, when I cook this at home, I did find, we did a taste test. And we found that doing this with just, some sugar in here, cornstarch and cinnamon, it was a little too tart. So because of blackberries. So I'm going to add just a little bit of honey in here. You could do honey. If you're doing something for, a vegan, if someone doesn't like honey, then you could always use a little maple syrup just to add another flavor in here and cut that sweetness a little bit and make sure that it's going to taste, really good. We're going to also add a brightness of a tiny bit of lemon zest, because lemon zest does have that bright flavor. You don't want to go too far down on the zest because of that pith, and the pith is what makes things taste bitter. So I'm just going to do a little bit of lemon zest on here just to add some brightness. Doesn't have to be a ton. And that essentially is all that goes into the base part of this dessert. Just sugar, cornstarch, some cinnamon for flavor, and a little bit of lemon.
zest. Now in the recipe, we use like 4.5 cups. I'm not using that much. I'm showing you a smaller amount just because we're not going to cook a huge container in here. But if you don't want to do one big container, you can do small ramekins. Ramekin looks like this. Just a small container. I've got a bunch of these. They're safe to put into the microwave. You could put them into the oven. You know, they work well heating them up. And it's nice because you can get varying sizes and make more individual servings. That way, if I'm only having maybe 1 or 2 people over and I don't want to be, you know, make a huge warm berry tart that's just going to sit and not, you know, be utilized. I'll put this up to me. You know, we've got our berries here. I'll throw it here so Sam can see it. We just throw as much as you want into the container, and that's ready to be topped with our crumb topping. Gonna do a quick check over here on our burgers. Make sure everything's looking good. They are looking good. With our chicken again. Make sure our chicken cooks all the way through. So I'm just doing a quick. Okay. So now we have our berries ready to go. You always need a crumble topping. Now that's where you can get into like a little bit of hot water and be, you know, getting more sugar, more flour. You know, there's nothing better than having sort of a nice, you know, crusty top when you have a berry dessert that's very soft. We're playing with texture, we're adding flavor, but we are trying to lighten up our barbecue and offer healthy things to our family and our friends and ourselves so we can cut down. You know, traditionally, if you're doing a lot of like cobblers, you're going to have, you know, more flour in it. It's going to have, you know, you're going to cut up butter into it. And I think the recipe I used for years, you would actually put in about 7 tablespoons of butter, and you'd be working it into the flour and the sugar so that you could, and the oats, so you could get that nice texture. But we want to make sure we're not going too heavy on the fat. We're not going too heavy on the carbs. So we're really omitting the flour in this. We need the cornstarch in the berry part because it's going to give that creaminess. You don't really need it in the topping. So if we are going to make this and really just use really healthy ingredients, we have a cup of whole rolled oats. And you want to stay at the whole ones. If you only have quick oats at home, that's fine. But it's going to taste a little bit more interesting to your palate if you have the whole oats. Sorry, that's my butter. I melted. We have our cinnamon, nutmeg, and ground ginger. So those are all measured in. You can mix them up pretty easily. And we need a little bit of sweetness, and we're not going to completely omit the sugar because the benefit of having some sugar in here is it's going to caramelize. It's going to get a nice flavor and texture. It's going to help your oats stay together, and it's going to taste more like a traditional, you know, cobbler crisp topping. Sorry, I should say crisp. I always grew up having apple crisp that my grandmother would make. So I always liked having that little crunchiness on top of like the soft cooked fruit. So now where you usually would take a bunch of butter, you'd have a lot more flour in here. You'll see that we don't have a lot. We have some brown sugar. You can use light brown, probably best. You can use dark brown. We have our oats, which we know are good for us. They've got a lot of fiber in them. They're also offering some, you know, good, healthy, complex carbohydrates. And we have our seasoning. We have our ginger and our nutmeg and our cinnamon to give great flavor. This is just 2 tablespoons of melted butter. By using the melted butter instead of, you know, the stick butter, we're able to kind of spread it around, mix it in really well, get a nice coverage of all the oats. Let's see. It'll help hold it together a little bit, but we do not expect it to be completely one solid mass. It's going to be crumbly, but now it's got the flavor and the texture and a little sweetness in here to hold it together. So once that's done, you just top it however much you want. You know, the recipe, this one will cover the whole crisp. I'll be honest, depending how many I'm making, I really like the crunchy topping. So I usually will make a little bit more than the recipe says. I might do like 1.5 times or double it, but you just want to be able to cover some of the top. It doesn't have to be a huge mound. It's going to cook along with it because we're using frozen in this. It will cook. If I make a whole recipe that I sent you and you're putting it into like a pie dish and putting the topping, because it's frozen, it's going to take a little longer to cook. You want to put it in for about an hour at 375. That gives plenty of time for all the liquid to come out of the berries, for the cornstarch to help thicken it. The topping will get a little bit brown, so it makes it taste really nice, but it takes an hour. So you have to do that if you're trying to cook and get ready for the family that's there. Like I said, if I was cooking this and eating it in real time, we would have started with this. But I can also prep this ahead of time, just like I did. So with the smaller ramekins, though, you save a lot of time. I found that when it was this ramekin size that I have, that's probably a little bit closer to a little more than a cup, maybe a cup and a half, it took about 25, 30 minutes. So I cut my time in half. You can just throw a bunch of these onto a sheet tray. It's a little easier to pull out and then, produce them as you need to, but you're going to get a nice flavor and texture, and they do reheat well. So if you end up not eating it, you can cover it with tin foil and bring it out afterward. So let's look at all of our food together so we can decide what we think of our plant-based or at least healthier protein meals. It's a barbecue, so we have to have some buns. If you prefer to go bunless with your burger, that's fine. You could just throw it on the plate. But if we're going to have our backyard barbecue and we want to make sure we're offering what people are looking for, getting sort of that traditional burger feel, we're going to grab one of our black bean burgers. You can see it's a nice color on here. It looks kind of like a beef burger. Set it on there. We have our chicken burger, which has nice color and texture. It's been cooked through. We're going to set it on this. And now to get that great flavor. Now, if you want to, you could add cheese. I did it at home with I think I used white cheddar on one, and I also used aged Gouda because they're a little bit milder flavor than doing like a sharp cheddar. So it looked a little nicer than having like a big orange piece of cheese. So your aged Gouda is going to be a little bit more of a mellow color, just like a white cheddar. But with this, because we have these great flavors and textures with the chicken, we are using the balsamic vegetables. So these have now reduced down. We have the balsamic on our mushrooms and onions. So instead of doing the old fashioned, should just use my hands for this, the old fashioned way of doing, the lettuce, the tomato, the onion, this will offer up kind of a nice savory way of presenting the food. And I'll put it here so you can see it. You can put it on both burgers. You could just do it on the chicken, or you could go old school and do it how you normally make your burgers. We want to serve it up along with our bean salad. So we got our nice bean salad. It's had time to sit for a little bit so that it's soaking up the flavors. It's probably best if you prep this ahead of time so it can sit in your fridge, because you have all these dry herbs and fresh herbs. If you add a little salt, you want to make sure it has time to sit and really get those flavors together so that it tastes good, it tastes pleasing. And then the final thing is we want to look what our warm berry cobbler looks like. So once it has been cooked, you'll see you get a nice brown texture in here. You have the gelled fruit that's around it. This obviously is cold, or I would not be holding it in my hands, but it has a great flavor and texture. And really, if you're going to make it more like a summer party, you're going to want to add in some, I would put some ice cream on it, a little scoop of ice cream or frozen yogurt, or even doing a little whipped cream on top is a nice way to be able to add some cool, creamy flavor along with the tartness of the berries and the crispiness of the warm berry cobbler. So that's it. You have your 4/5 recipes. We have our ground chicken burger with our balsamic onions and mushrooms. We have our very easy bean burger, and our bean salad along with our warm berry dessert. And I think you have a recipe for a night that everyone's going to love and not feel guilty about. We kept all the fats down, we kept the flavors up, and we made it something that would be really enjoyable for everybody. Now is always the time I like to see if anyone has any questions. And Sam will field them through. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have questions specifically about this or anything else about maybe lightening up your barbecue.
Joan Meadows, can you cut out the burgers? I'm sorry, let me read that again. Can you cut the burgers so we can see?
Oh, sure.